Hey everyone, welcome back. And if this is your first time to my channel, welcome aboard. I am super happy you found your way to my little corner of the internet. Today's episode is an interesting one because it is about something that quietly shapes every creative life, whether we talk about it or not. In today's video, I'm going to talk about creative well-being and mindset. It's going to be about actually staying creative over time without burning out or shutting down or losing the joy that brought you to making art in the first place. So this is not going to be an episode about productivity hacks or growth tricks or forcing yourself to do more. It is going to be very much about learning how to create in a way that supports you rather than drains you. It is about building a relationship with creativity that can last, one that adapts as you grow and change. Before we dive in though, if you really enjoy, in this case, a very thoughtful conversation about art or creativity, I'd really like it if you hit that like button, and I would appreciate it even more if you hit that subscribe button. If you want to check things out up close and even more in depth, and you want to get some art merch up to 4 times per year, I also invite you to check out my Patreon. The link is down below in the description of this video. But with all the plugging out of the way, welcome back to another Butcher Shop. So first off, let's start with asking the obvious question: what is creative well-being? It starts with a very simple and very powerful idea. Creativity doesn't exist in isolation from the rest of your life. It lives inside your mind, in your body, and your emotions, but also in your environment. And because of that, it is deeply affected by how you are treated by yourself and by the world around you. Many people think that if creativity is struggling, the solution must be to push harder, work longer hours, be more disciplined, eliminate any form of resistance. And sometimes, in very short bursts, that approach seems to work. But over time, it often leads to exhaustion rather than actual growth. So creative well-being asks a different question. Instead of asking how to extract more output from yourself, it asks you how to create the conditions where creativity feels safe enough to emerge naturally. It recognizes that creativity thrives on curiosity and on openness and on trust, and I'll come back to this whole trust bit a bit later on in the video. But it does allow you to believe that these things don't disappear when pressure becomes constant. We live in a culture where creativity is always on display. Finished work is everywhere. If you scroll Insta for a couple of minutes, 99% of what you see is finished work, or like a brief, a couple of shots of process work, and then boop, the work is done. So we are often presented these images without context, without all the uncertainty and doubt and experimentation that went behind the production of those pieces. There's also numbers attached to art. We got likes and views and sales and shares. We are constantly confronted with some form of measurable success. Numbers define the success of whatever is being created. And I think that over time, this has reshaped how a lot of us create. We have stopped asking, what feels meaningful, and we have started asking ourselves what will be received well. And I think that shift, which is not subtle at all, like if you think about it, that shift has been a very hard slap in the face to some of us. but it can really drain the life out of the creative process. And I also personally struggle with this very often. So I thought, let's do an episode about what this means and how we can turn this fatigue around to make this whole, to make this creative well-being work for us. Now, something that is of a very big influence on our creative well-being is something that almost every artist knows. It is the voice in your head that shows up mid-process. It is the voice that comments while you're still working or still exploring, while you're still figuring things out. And it might tell you that what you're making isn't good enough, or that it's been done before, or that you're wasting your time. We all have this little voice, this art critic inside of us that speaks before its turn. And it can be very annoying. It can be very demotivating, and it's... the funny thing is, what I've learned is that that voice has a very clear counterpart, and it exists of only a few words. It is the trust the process voice. Whatever that inner art critic says, if you just return it with trust the process, I've learned that already helps quite a lot. Anyway, so this inner critic can sometimes feel very harsh and very malicious, maybe even. Most of the time, it is rooted in fear. Fear of rejection or failure. Sometimes even fear of being misunderstood, It is trying to sort of protect you from pain that might come or might not at all, but we start to believe that it's going to come anyway. But sometimes the voice, and I know this sounds weird because I'm referring to this voice as if it's a completely different person than ourselves. But the voice doesn't understand that creativity needs that room to breathe. And basically what I mean with that is that sometimes we are so harsh on ourselves that we have to produce something that is, amazing on first try, whereas art actually needs that room to fail. We only get better through failure, and very often we don't allow ourselves, that critical success of failure, if that makes sense. We judge ourselves too early, and it causes us to interrupt the exploration. So imagine trying to tell a story. You're sitting around a campfire, you got a bunch of friends around you, and you've also invited that one friend that always interrupts everybody. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. So you sit down and you tell your story, and that person keeps interrupting you. And it points out every flaw in your story before you've even reached the end of that sentence. Eventually, and for some people this may be sooner, for other people this may be later, but you'll stop speaking altogether. And that is basically what happens creatively when you allow that inner critic to speak before its turn, time and time again. One of the most helpful mindset shifts you can make here is learning to separate creation from evaluation. So when you're creating, your role is to explore. It is your job. It is what you are here to do. You have an idea and you are going out on an adventure to explore where this idea might lead to. And it might lead to great success, but it might also lead to something that you will crumple into a ball of paper and just chug it. It's fine. That's part of the process. When you're evaluating, your role is to refine. Both are important, but both belong in different moments of time. Learning to sort of gently postpone that judgment, to say, you know what, I'll come back to this at a later moment when you feel like you're getting stuck in a sketch. it can really dramatically change how a safe creation process can feel. So I know this is kind of difficult because it's going to be a battle against yourself, because again, this voice is not this, it's not a different person than you. It's basically your own mirror. You're talking to a mirror. So it can be very difficult to tell yourself to shut up for a while. But I promise you, it is worth it is worth entertaining the idea. It is worth training that other voice that says, trust the process, go out and explore. Be that Bilbo Baggins who jumps over the fence going, I'm going on an adventure, because you are. Every drawing, every sketch you make is a little adventure. It is an exploration into what you can do and how you can do it better. So, tell that voice to shut up for a moment and do what you do best. Sketch, draw, paint, explore, try out new things, experiment, and fail. Because again, through failure, that's when you really get better at things. And speaking of our inner critic, let's talk about perfectionism for a quick second, because they really go hand in hand. And something very interesting that can happen or that can manifest itself as a result of that is the fear of the white canvas. And I've talked about this before in some of my videos, but I have terrible fear of the white canvas. Sometimes I can sit and stare at my screen for hours before I begin. And it's really, for me personally, it is the fear of commitment. Because once I draw, I set that first stripe of color, or once I move my brush, I am committed. I cannot quit. I have to bring that piece to the end. And it's daunting. It is absolutely horrifying to think that on that very moment, your pen touches the tablet, you are committing yourself to 20, 30, 40 hours of work. It's like, I guess you can compare it to getting up on Monday morning knowing that you still have a full week ahead. In some way, it's the same. It's like once you get started, you have to finish it. And I am well aware that nobody forces me, to finish the thing. If I'm halfway and I feel like it's not going anywhere, I can quit. I can. So this is just your example that I'm struggling with my inner critic just as much as anyone, because my inner critic also tells me to keep going, even though it also tells me that I suck. So it's my workflow can be pretty toxic, and I've over time I've learned to sort of deal with this and to give these things a place, where they can talk to me and where I actually sit down and sometimes listen to my critics. But this fear of the beginning, it can be a huge thing. Getting started is, after all, the only way you can get your art done. What it can sometimes lead to, though, is procrastination. Or sometimes it can get so bad that you can't get started even with an idea anymore. You start fearing, thinking up new ideas, or you wait for clarity or confidence or certainty. But those things rarely come before action. More often they come through action. So an idea, is in your head and you might be able to sketch it. And then you want to start coloring and you suddenly freeze because, like I said, coloring means a commitment. But it is often while the coloring process takes shape, that ideas refine themselves. So again, you need this beginning, you need the action to, move on and to, you can only get to the finish if you start, right? Creative well-being means allowing yourself to begin before you feel ready. Sometimes it means accepting that early versions will be imperfect, and that imperfection is not necessarily failure, it's information. Finished, imperfect work teaches you far more than perfect ideas that never leave your imagination. Basically, what I'm saying here is, it might sound a bit contradictory because on one way I'm saying, don't force yourself to work. Because if you force it, like they say, art is like a fart. If you have to force it, it's probably shit. And that is true. But sometimes we are waiting for this sort of perfect circumstance, and it's never going to come. There are no perfect circumstances. So sometimes you have to get started, even though it feels uncomfortable, in order to get to where we want to be. And I think the nuance in there lies in the word uncomfortable. It should not feel exhausting, or it should not feel like anxiety. It should feel uncomfortable. And I think that is fine. I think there is always a sense of uncomfortable feelings when we are in the process. And I think the whole process is to chase that uncomfortable feeling away, if that makes sense. So it's a very thin balance that works differently for everyone. But it is important that you learn to differentiate between, hey, now I'm just procrastinating because I'm holding myself back, or I'm procrastinating because, if I start now, I will literally drop dead because I'm so exhausted. So that's just something that I want to give to all of you. Learn to understand the voice inside that says, I don't want to get started. Can you not get started, or don't you want to get started? There is a difference. All right, so one last thing that I would like to talk about for a quick second is you are not your art. You are not what you make. Many creatives unknowingly tie their identity very closely to their work. And when the work is praised, they feel affirmed and they feel great. And when it's ignored or criticized, they feel diminished. And it makes sense because art is often very personal, but it can also make creativity emotionally very dangerous. When your sense of self depends on how your work is being received, every response feels loaded. And this really goes back to the whole, the tiny dopamine rush whenever we get a like on our socials. But imagine that this goes for basically everything that makes you you. Your art is a very important part of who you are, but it is not the same. And sometimes these worlds kind of blur together. We become our art, and it only leads to, very overwhelming feelings, basically. Rejection hurts more than it needs to. And silence, whenever we post something on socials and we don't go viral, which I think 99.9% of us will never, will never see that happen. Silence can feel like failure. Experimentation starts to feel risky, but experimentation is the whole core business of art. I just talked about it. Creative well-being introduces a sort of gentle but important distinction. You are the one who creates, but you are not the creation itself. And saying it with these very specific words makes that difference so clearly. You are Victor Frankenstein. You are not the Frankenstein monster. They are two different people. Okay, fine, I admit I'm a very big Frankenstein fan, so I just had to put that in there. But really, the truth remains the same. You are not what you create. Your art matters, but your worth, your value is not dependent on, its reception. So when this separation becomes clearer, creativity often becomes a little bit braver. You become more willing to explore and to change or to take risks, because failure no longer feels like that judgment of you as a person. It's going to start to feel like part of the process, and we trust the process. Remember that little voice I talked about, and I said I'd come back to this. That trust is so incredibly important. Even when, our muse decides to go on a vacation for a couple of weeks or maybe even months, it will come back. And that trust is so incredibly important. And this is something that I had to learn the hard way as well. Like, it took me years and years to absolutely blindly trust the fact that if I feel a couple of days or weeks or sometimes even months, like I can't create a single thing, I trust that it will come back to me. I'm not going to lose my skills. I'm not going to suddenly not be able anymore to draw or forget how to hold my pencil or brushes. None of that is going to happen. All I need is a creative idea. And on that moment, I don't have any ideas. And it is a very strong signal that I need more input. A car is not going to drive without fuel. So basically, when my muse leaves for a bit, I just need fuel. I need inspiration. So it's not a sign of, oh my God, you lost your skills, this is the end of your career. No, it is the most important sign that you need to trust that your creative process, your creative thinking will come back to you. Creative well-being isn't about making art effortless. It is about making it sustainable. It is about learning how to care for the part of you that creates instead of constantly demanding more from it. If there's one thing I hope you take from this episode, it's this. Your creativity doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be cared for. If this episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like it, or maybe even subscribe to the channel. And perhaps you can even share it with someone, who might need to hear this. If you'd like to support the continuation of this work, please do check out my Patreon. It is linked down below. But if you got this far into the video, all I can say really is thank you so much for watching. And I really want to say take care of yourself and take care of your creativity. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.